Madeline Stafford stood in the carpeted hallway outside her husband's private study, with a document in her hands that he had described, twice, as standard quarterly paperwork, and read the same sentence for the fourth time, and understood that she had made the most expensive mistake of her adult life. She had not signed the quarterly tax filings. She had signed a proxy agreement, granting Ambrose Stafford full discretionary authority over all Wyndham Mills shares held in her name, effective upon receipt by the Massachusetts Registry of Deeds, which had occurred, according to the stamped date on the third page, 11 days ago. If you are new here, please subscribe and stay with Madeline's story all the way to the end. What she does in the next 2 hours is something the Boston textile trade will talk about for years. And leave a comment letting me know where you are watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. The morning Madeline had married Ambrose Stafford, 4 years ago, in a ceremony the Boston Globe had described as a dignified union of two established families. She had been 23 years old and clear-eyed about exactly what was happening. Her father had spent 2 years watching his health decline and 6 months watching his business competitors circle, and he had made the decision that Madeline needed a husband with legal standing to protect the mill if he died, before she was ready to manage it alone. Ambrose Stafford came from an old merchant family. He was measured, well-connected, and had never given her father any reason to doubt his intentions. Madeline had not loved him when she married him. She had respected him in the careful, provisional way you respected a business arrangement that hadn't yet had time to prove itself. She had grown into something more than that in the years since. Not the devotion her mother had carried for her father like a second heartbeat, but something quieter and more durable. A domestic steadiness she had begun, genuinely, to count on. She had believed he respected her in return. She pressed the proxy document flat against her palm and looked at the stamp again. 11 days. Her father, Edmund Wyndham, had died 14 months ago in the chair beside his desk, where he always reviewed the week's ledgers. He had left Madeline everything: the mill, the accounts, the trade contracts that ran along 4 river routes and fed work to 300 families in 2 counties. He had left it to her because she was the one who had learned the business beside him, who had spent her girlhood reading freight manifests, while other girls her age practiced embroidery, who could look at a production schedule and identify its weaknesses before the foreman finished explaining it. She was the one who knew the work. He had also left her Rufus Hatch. Rufus had been Wyndham Mills's chief bookkeeper for 29 years. He was 61 years old and had known Madeline since she was 4. He had followed her into the office when her father began dying, and had remained after the funeral with the specific quiet ferocity of a man who understood that his loyalty did not expire with the person he had given it to. He reported to Madeline now, completely and without ceremony, and she trusted him with the precision and confidence of someone who has known a person long enough to understand the exact shape of their character. She trusted him, and she had not thought to trust him with this. And that was the first thing she needed to correct. She walked to the small office at the end of the hall and knocked once before entering. Rufus looked up from his ledger. He saw her face. His expression did not change, but something in his attention sharpened in a way she recognized, the particular alertness of a man who can distinguish between a woman's ordinary face and the face she shows when something has already gone wrong and she has already decided what to do about it. He did not ask. He waited. "I need to ask you something plainly," Madeline said. She sat down across from him, which she rarely did. "Has anything changed in the formal ownership accounts in the past month? Anything filed externally? Registry documents, transfer authorizations, proxies?" Rufus was quiet for 4 seconds, she counted. "Mr. Stafford had me prepare a set of documents in January," he said. "He told me they were related to streamlining the quarterly tax filings. He reviewed them before sending them to Mr. Grafton's office." He paused. "I prepared them as instructed. I did not see the final versions that were submitted." Madeline looked at him steadily. "And you said nothing to me?" "No, ma'am." He met her gaze without flinching. "I told myself it was routine administrative work. I was wrong to assume that. I know I was wrong." She set the proxy document on his desk. He read the relevant paragraph. The color in his face shifted by a degree he did not allow to become visible, but which she read anyway, because she had known his face for 23 years. "I need 2 things," Madeline said. "I need the original mill charter. My grandfather's founding charter, not the revised articles, the original document, and I need you to tell me whether there is anything in it that Grafton might have missed." Rufus looked at her carefully. "What are you looking for?" "A reason this proxy is not valid," she said. "My father spent 40 years building things that were difficult to take apart. I want to know if he built anything into the ownership structure that would require additional authorization for a transfer of this kind." Rufus was quiet for longer than the question required, and that pause told her the answer before he spoke it. "Section 9, he said, "of the original charter, no transfer of majority interest in Windham Mills, including by proxy, is valid without the countersignature of the founding chief officer of record." She waited. "Your grandfather named himself in that capacity," Rufus continued. "When he died, the provision transferred to your father. Your father never formally reassigned it. When he died, it reverted to the original charter language, which names the founding officer's legal successor not by name but by position. The position was never filled after your father died. No one thought to." He paused. "Under the charter, if the position remains unassigned, the countersignature authority reverts to the majority shareholder directly." "Which is me," Madeline said. "Yes, ma'am. And I did not countersign this proxy." "No, you did not." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, she could hear the household moving through its morning, the cook below, a cart on the street. It was the 14th of March, 1871, and in 2 hours, the quarterly shareholders' meeting of Windham Mills would begin in the boardroom, 4 blocks away, and Ambrose Stafford intended to arrive with a document that would transfer the management of everything her father had built into his name. "Rufus," she said, "is there anything else you haven't told me?" He held her gaze. A longer moment passed than before. "There is one thing," he said. "I have been uncertain whether to raise it." He set his pen down. "Mrs. Delphine Marsden came to this office 6 weeks before your wedding, before you were married. She asked to see the Windham Mills trade summary, the public commission filing, not the detailed ledgers." Madeline went very still. Delphine Marsden had been Ambrose's closest friend since childhood, a widow of 3 years, who called on Madeline every Tuesday for tea, and who had, over the course of 4 years, become the woman Madeline trusted most among her social acquaintances, the one who listened well, who asked intelligent questions about the mill with what had seemed like genuine curiosity, who had made the transition into marriage and a new household feel less like loss than like enlargement. "She asked to see the accounts," Madeline said, 6 weeks before my wedding." "Your father was in the hospital," Rufus said. 3 weeks before the end. I thought she was making a social inquiry on behalf of the Marsden family's trade connections. I showed her only what was available in the public record." He looked at her steadily. "I should have told you. I am sorry, Mrs. Stafford." Madeline looked at the proxy document on the desk between them. 6 weeks before her wedding, 3 weeks before her father died. Delphine had come to assess the value of what Ambrose would be gaining, before either the marriage or the mourning had taken place. She thought about 4 years of Tuesday teas. About every conversation she had shared freely, because Delphine had always seemed to understand, had always asked questions that showed she was genuinely paying attention. She thought about the evening last autumn when she had mentioned, only to Delphine, that the quarterly tax filings were proving unusually complicated. Ambrose had suggested streamlining the paperwork 1 week later. She had thought at the time that he was being considerate. She allowed herself to sit with the full shape of this for exactly the time it required. Then she stood. "We need to leave for the boardroom in 90 minutes, she said. "I need you to bring the original charter. I need you to send a message to Attorney Crandall on Tremont Street. Tell him it is urgent and ask him to meet me at the Congress Street offices. Before 10. And Rufus." She looked at him directly. "From this point forward, anything you know that concerns this mill or this family, anything at all, you bring to me. Not to protect me from worry, not to wait for better evidence. You bring it to me and let me decide what it means." He straightened in his chair. "You have my word, Mrs. Stafford, completely and without reservation." She walked out. She spent 15 minutes in what had been her father's sitting room, before Ambrose converted it, standing in the light from the southern window and going through everything she now knew, with the same methodical care she had been taught to apply to a ledger that didn't balance. Not looking for what she wanted to find, but for what was actually there. Ambrose had not married her because of anything that resembled what she had come to believe it was. He had married her because Delphine had assessed the mill's accounts and reported back, and because someone had calculated that a marriage was the most efficient legal mechanism for obtaining control of what she owned. He had spent 4 years building her trust. He had done it with patience and consistency, and she had believed it, because she had been looking for reasons to believe it, which was the part she intended to sit with for a long time, privately, when the work in front of her was finished. She thought about Section 9 of the original charter. She thought about the provision her father had never removed, and about whether he had left it in place deliberately as a kind of insurance, the sort of long-horizon caution that men, who had spent their lives protecting things, developed without always naming what they were protecting against. She thought, he built better than they knew. Then she put on her coat and went to meet Crandall. The attorney was waiting in the anteroom of the Congress Street offices, a compact, careful man of 60, who had prepared her father's estate documents, and who had understood from the brevity and the tone of her message that it was not the kind of urgent that could be managed at his own pace. She showed him the proxy document and the relevant section of the charter in 3 minutes, because she had learned from her father that a clean presentation of facts required nothing more than the facts themselves. Crandall read both documents. He looked up. "This proxy is defective," he said, with the precise neutrality of an attorney choosing words for their legal weight rather than their social comfort. "Without the countersignature of the founding officer's legal successor, which, as the original charter reads, is you, this document cannot be validly registered under Massachusetts property law. Any action taken on the basis of it would be void." "The registry stamp is 11 days old," Madeline said. "The stamp is procedural, validity is substantive." He set the document down carefully. Whoever drafted this either did not read the original charter thoroughly, or assumed the provision had been superseded by the revised articles. It was not. "I need you present during the meeting," Madeline said, "and prepared to speak to the document's legal status if I ask you to." He looked at her for a moment, the evaluating look of a man recalibrating his understanding of what kind of morning this was. "I will be," he said. She walked into the boardroom. There were 7 people at the table when she entered. 3 senior shareholders, 2 mill managers, and the administrative secretary who had worked at Windham Mills for 16 years. They rose when she came in. Her father had been a man people rose for without being asked, and she had not corrected the habit because she had not yet decided whether to carry it forward or change it. She received it without comment and sat in her father's chair, which was now hers, and had been since the morning after the funeral. Ambrose arrived 4 minutes later. He saw her at the head of the table, and his face arranged itself into a neutral expression, with the smoothness of a man who had practiced this exact transition in rooms that required it. He sat. The meeting was called to order. The secretary read the quarterly summary. Madeline listened and noted 2 discrepancies in the production figures in the margin of her agenda, because the habit of precision did not pause for difficult mornings. When the administrative portion concluded, Ambrose reached into his case and produced a folder of documents. "Before we move to new business," he said, "I'd like to table a structural matter for the board's review. A transfer of management authority related to the majority shareholding, which has been." "I'm aware of the document," Madeline said. The room went still. She looked at him, and then she looked at the 7 faces around the table. The senior shareholders, the managers, the secretary. All of them carrying the particular quality of attention that settles over a room when people realize the situation is not what they arrived expecting it to be. "The proxy agreement," she continued, "which I signed in January under the understanding that it concerned routine tax administration." Her voice was even. She had her father's voice when it mattered, low and unhurried, the voice of a person who does not need volume to be heard. "I reviewed the document this morning, and the original Windham Mills founding charter." She placed the charter on the table. Crandall, standing at the side of the room, stepped forward. "Section 9 of the founding charter," Madeline said, "which was never revised and remains legally operative, requires the counter-signature of the founding chief officer of record, or their legal successor, for any proxy transfer of majority interest to be valid. That position was never formally reassigned after my father's death. Under the charter's own language, the authority reverts to the majority shareholder." She looked at Ambrose. "Which is me. I did not countersign this document." Silence. One of the senior shareholders, a man named Aldridge who had traded with her father for 20 years and who was not a man given to visible reaction, looked at the charter provision, then at the proxy document, then at Madeline, and said nothing. In a man who had spent 40 years in Boston commerce, that silence was the most unambiguous response in the room. "Mr. Crandall," Madeline said, Would you please confirm for the board what you determined this morning regarding the document's legal validity? Crandall spoke for 4 minutes in the measured, unhurried voice of a man who had spent 40 years presenting legal findings to rooms that needed to understand them. When he finished, the quality of the silence shifted, not the silence of shock, but the silence of 7 people calculating rapidly what they had been told and what it meant. Ambrose said quietly and still controlled, "Madeline." His voice had not changed. He was still performing, still making the calculation of what expression a room required. "I think there has been a misunderstanding about the nature of the document." "There has been a misunderstanding," she agreed. "I misunderstood the document I was asked to sign. I signed it in good faith because I trusted you." She held his gaze steadily, with the stillness she had learned from a father who believed the most important thing you could do in a room full of watching people was to refuse to be moved. "You described it as a tax administration matter. It was a proxy agreement transferring management of everything my father built into your name." She heard the sound that moved through the room. Not dramatic, not a gasp, just the subtle collective shift of people reconfiguring their understanding of a morning they had arrived to understand very differently. Ambrose put the folder back in his case. His composure held. She would give him that. It held completely, right to the end. "The document is defective," he said. "I can see that Crandall has identified a provision I was not aware of. I'll have Grafton review it." He said Grafton's name with careful neutrality, not enough weight on it to suggest anything, not enough lightness to dismiss it. "I think the board deserves to know," Madeline said, "that Mr. Grafton drafted this proxy and submitted it to the Registry of Deeds. A document that purported to transfer majority shareholding on the basis of a tax administration signature." She looked at Aldridge, then at the other shareholders. "I do not believe that describes a clerical oversight." She reached into her folio and placed a second document on the table. "This is correspondence forwarded to me this week through the Trade Association's legal network, from a woman named Estelle Fairmont in Philadelphia. Mrs. Fairmont's late husband's shipping accounts were managed, following his death, by an attorney named Grafton. The same Grafton. A proxy agreement was filed in that case under similar circumstances, and was successfully registered before Mrs. Fairmont understood what she had signed. She has spent 2 years attempting to recover what she lost." The room was very quiet. Aldridge read the letter. He set it down. He looked at Ambrose with the expression of a man who has arrived at a conclusion, and has decided not to speak it aloud because the situation does not require him to. "I am not asking for anything that is not mine," Madeline said. "I am asking the board to recognize that this proxy document is legally invalid and that any action taken on its basis will be challenged through the proper courts." She paused. "I am also asking that Mr. Grafton's relationship with this company and his access to its records be formally reviewed." Ambrose stood. He did it slowly, with the deliberate composure of a man deciding what face to leave a room with. He picked up his case. He looked at the 7 people watching him, and made whatever calculation men like him always made in that particular moment. And he walked to the door and out of it, and did not look back. The sound that followed him into the hall was not jeering, not condemnation. It was just 7 people turning to watch a man walk away from something he had tried to take, and the specific quality of that silence was the most comprehensive thing Madeline had heard in a long time. She sat in her father's chair and breathed once, slowly, and let the weight of the morning settle into something she could carry. Aldridge waited until the room had cleared. He came to her and said, in the direct way of a man who had known her father well enough to speak plainly, "Edmund handled things clean, never wasted emotion." He looked at her. "I think you may be faster than he was." He left without requiring a response, which she appreciated. She found Delphine that afternoon at the house on Marlborough Street. Delphine answered the door herself, which meant she had been told and had been expecting either Madeline or something worse. She looked at Madeline's face, and the performance that Madeline had watched her give every Tuesday for 4 years dissolved in approximately 3 seconds. "Come in," she said. They sat in the front parlor where Madeline had sat a dozen times, across from each other in chairs she knew well, and the familiarity of the room felt now like a kind of evidence. "Before you say anything," Delphine said. Her hands were pressed flat on her knees. "I want you to know that I believed. I told myself that it would be good for both of you, that Ambrose would be a capable manager and that you would be. You assessed my father's accounts," Madeline said. 6 weeks before my wedding, 3 weeks before he died." Delphine went very still. Rufus told me, Madeline said. He should have told me before. I understand why he didn't, and I understand how you needed him to believe it was ordinary. She looked at the woman across from her, the composed, attentive, genuinely intelligent woman who had asked careful questions on 100 Tuesdays and had used everything Madeline gave her with such precision that Madeline had never once felt used. What were you looking for? The production contracts, Delphine said very quietly. Ambrose needed to know if the mill's value was real, whether it was worth the investment. She stopped on the word investment, as if she heard it land the way Madeline heard it. And it was worth it, Madeline said. Yes. And the marriage happened. Yes. And you had tea with me every Tuesday for 4 years. Delphine did not answer. She looked at her hands. I want to ask you something directly, Madeline said. Did you believe he would take care of me? When it was finished, when he had the mill, did you believe he would be fair? A long pause. I told myself he would, Delphine said. The words were barely audible. You told yourself, Madeline repeated. Not that you believed it, that you told yourself. Delphine's breath shifted. Yes. They sat with that for a moment. You are going to give a written statement to Attorney Crandall, Madeline said. Everything you know. What you assessed, what you reported, what Ambrose told you about his intentions before and during the marriage. All of it. That will be. People will know. Delphine's voice had lost its evenness. What I was involved in, what I did. Some people will know, Madeline said. Others will understand that you were used by a man who gave you just enough of the plan to involve you and not enough to protect you when it failed. You were meant to be useful, Delphine. You were not a partner. She paused. You know that, I think. Even if you haven't said it to yourself directly yet. She looked at the familiar face across from her, the face she had trusted, which had trusted her enough to come to the door and tell the truth. What you do now is the only part of this you still control. The statement tomorrow helps both of us. Keep that in mind. Delphine looked at her for a long moment. Yes, she said without hedging. Tomorrow. It was the most honest thing Madeline had heard her say in 4 years, and she noted it. The legal proceedings moved through the winter. Crandall filed the formal challenge to the proxy document, which the Middlesex County Court ruled invalid, on the grounds Madeline had identified. The charter provision was unambiguous, and the registry stamp was procedural, not determinative. Grafton's license was suspended pending investigation. The Fairmont case in Philadelphia was reopened using the Massachusetts findings as supporting evidence. Estelle Fairmont wrote to Madeline in May. 4 pages, careful and direct, the handwriting of a woman who had spent 2 years saying difficult things in rooms that hadn't always listened. Madeline read the letter 3 times. She kept it in the file with the original charter and the proxy document and the mill's founding deed, because she thought the record of what had almost happened mattered as much as the record of what had been built. Ambrose Stafford left Boston in June. He took his personal effects and a reputation that had been efficiently and permanently dismantled by the convergence of a defective legal document, a 30-year-old charter provision, and a woman who had grown up reading her father's ledgers and had, at the critical moment, read his as well. She ran the mill herself in the year that followed. She hired a production manager she had been watching for 2 years. A woman named Dinah, who had managed the bookkeeping for 3 separate manufacturers before the men who employed her, found reasons to pass her over for advancement. Madeline offered her the position directly, named a salary that reflected the work rather than the politics, and Dinah looked at her with an expression Madeline recognized very well, and said yes. She kept Rufus Hatch on with a formal increase in his salary and a written record in the company files that described his judgment as the kind most men spent their whole careers trying to develop. She put it in writing because her father had believed that when something true and important was known, it deserved to be documented. She did not hurry to trust again after that. She thought that was reasonable, thought her father, who had trusted carefully and well for 40 years, would have called it reasonable. She thought she was allowed to take the time that the work required, to choose from materials she had tested herself, to move slowly and with her eyes fully open. On a November morning, with the first frost-making patterns on the study window and the mill's winter production schedule spread across her father's desk, her desk now, she thought about what he had actually left her. Not the accounts, not the contracts, not the river routes, not even the charter with its quiet protection written into Section 9. He had left her the capacity to look clearly at what had almost happened, to understand it without flinching, and to build something better on the other side of it. With the tools she had developed beside him, and the judgment she had been developing ever since, the mill would outlast the men who had tried to take it. She was 27 years old, and she was just beginning.